Brian Jodice. Brian is the press secretary for the American Federation for Children, a nonprofit that was founded by the former Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, to lobby for school choice. So school choice, essentially the big issue there. So I would assume, Brian, then you're on board with what the president is doing. I would say maybe we could bring up some of what the governor and I were talking about with previous guests as well, about how significant what he's doing really is, when because that's what I'm hung up on for whatever reason, is just saying, oh, back to the states, when the states already have a lot of control of this country. What's your perspective on today?
Yeah, Connell, good to be with you. And I'll touch on that in a moment, but I do find it interesting, and I'll do my best to keep it PG here on national television. $20,000 a year per pupil spending in Delaware, ranks 15th in the nation, yet their 8th grade reading at 27-year lows. Might be worth focusing on there and maybe turning some of that aggression in that arena. But to your point
but that's kind of the point, right? That's what I was pressing the governor to some extent on, is that you have a lot of power already. What are you going to do? So what's really changing, I guess, is my larger question.
That's a great question. And you look at what happens today, and the president really outlined the timeline. You think back to 1982, where Ronald Reagan stands in front of Congress and talks about dismantling the Department of Education. Here we are 43 years later, promises made, promises kept, and focusing on what should be the ultimate goal here: get education back to the students, back to the states, back to families and students, as close to them as possible. And so today is the next step in that. And the president campaigned on this. He promised he was going to do it. There's no surprise that it's happened. And here's the key. Today is an important step, Connell. We got to get more education dollars back to the states, back to the students.
Right. Statement out from the Democratic leader in the Senate. We can put up on the screen from Chuck Schumer, basically summarizing, as the Democrats will say, this is going to hurt kids. See it right at the top. This will hurt kids. Calls it a horrible decision. And you can leave it up for a second. You can read the rest of it there. What would you say about that? Because I think the biggest argument, or the best argument saying it would hurt children, would be to say, well, we're not going to have the funding anymore for things like what the president just talked about, Title I schools, for example, or special education programs and all these things that come to the federal level. What might be an issue now is oversight. And I guess bring that up earlier. This says, well, if we give it to the states, all right, we're still going to fund them, but who's going to make sure they're doing the right thing? And then some, as many Democrats have said, some of these states might not make the right decisions as they see it in terms of how to administer some of these important programs. So how would you respond to that?
Well, how's the oversight been working for the last 45 years with the Washington middleman doing it from the Department of Education? It hasn't been working very well.
You mean on outcomes, but you're talking about outcomes. I'm talking about things like civil rights and access and Title I schools and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the Department of Justice can continue to handle civil rights. There are ways in which you could block grant those funds back to the states, get those in education savings accounts, get those in private school vouchers, get those to families. No, that's true. It actually could still be a federal. No, you're right. That's an interesting point. It still could be federally controlled, in other words, just not by a cabinet department called the Department of Education. Is that the point? Yeah, or you find creative ways, like Congress is exploring doing this year through the Educational Choice for Children Act, to unlock the tax code to supercharge school choice across the country as well. That takes the federal government out of it completely. It puts the parents back in power. Who do we trust? Look over my shoulder. Parents know best. We trust parents when it relates to their child's education, get them in the driver's seat for far too long. They've been left sort of without a voice. And again, this bureaucratic middleman in Washington has had some sort of perceived control. The teachers union have had a stranglehold on this. You want to talk about hurting kids? Blocking school doors for 2 years hurt a lot of kids across America. We got to open things up. We got to get it back to the states.
I get it on the unions. I've heard that for years. The thing I would push back on the parents, and I'm a parent myself with 3 children, is that I don't know. I've heard that over and over. And my argument on it has always been, I don't know. If I was going to have someone, like I'm the least handy person on earth, right? So if someone needs to fix my house, I'm the worst person to choose from. So I never know best. The guy who's going to fix the house, get him in and paint the house. So my wife is an education professional. She's a teacher. So I said, she's the one who should handle. So I do see the argument that you are better off with the pros sometimes than the parents in some cases.
Hey, but by no means does this discredit the important part that teachers play in this entire scenario, right? Motivated teacher, engaged parent, student who wants to learn. That's a key to success. But you know if something's wrong in your house, and you can get the handyman there to take care of it. Parents know what's best for their kids as it relates to their education. They want a seat at the table, right? And they want to be a part of it and be more involved.
No, I get that part of it. That was a good analogy on the come. All right, Brian, good discussion on all of this. We'll see what actually comes of it. Of course, Congress would have to eliminate it completely, but the president could go a long way to gutting the department, and that's what we saw at the startup today. Brian Jodice. Thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.